Ben Blanquera, my partner in crime with AI and you. Welcome back to another episode.
Good morning, Jeff. I'm excited to talk today.
Oh, man, what a great topic too! Responsible AI from some really incredible folks that we've got here in the industry. But before we get into that, folks, we know we got to cover the basics, the rules, the guidelines, if you will. Not a lot of rules here. But we would love for you to introduce yourselves. Tell us who you are. Tell us where you are in the world. We have an international set of folks on the panel here today, and I know that this group is an international one as well. So let's show them where everybody is in the world. So tell us who you are. Tell us where you are. Now, once you've done that, of course, as we're progressing through the conversation, we'd love for you to not just introduce yourself, but to ask any questions or comment along. We'll grab some of those and pull them into the conversation. We're not here to talk at you. We're talk with you in a conversation. So go ahead and do that. Now, Ben, today we're talking about responsible AI. You spend a little bit of time thinking about this sort of thing.
Yes, I do. It's going from hey, this is a really shiny object that can help me to something that is safe, secure, scalable, and is an enterprise sort of solution. That's a pretty big leap, and
It's
it
a
doesn't
real
just
big.
happen.
It
It
doesn't just
does
happen. And
because
that's
the
the topic for, yeah.
consequences could be bad if you don't do it well.
That's true. We were talking about that before we got started, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit more. But why don't we go ahead and bring our guests up onto the stage and introduce them all around. Now, one you'll find very familiar to the program. Rehgan, Avon, we're so glad to have you back. Why don't you introduce yourself really quick?
Awesome. Thanks for having me back. I love these. I look forward to them. It's super fun. Like they said, please interact with us in the chat. It's like one of my favorite parts. So if you have questions, comments, throw that in there. I'm Rehgan. I'm founder of Women in Analytics and co-founder and CEO of Align AI, which is an AI and governance adoption platform.
Well, so glad that you are back. Now, a new phase, taking an old seat, if you will. So we still have our strong partnership here in the program with the International Institute of Analytics. But one of the specialists who's been working with them for years is, well, who you see on the screen, and that is Giovanni Leoni. Giovanni, welcome to the program from far, far away, proving that with your map behind you. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you so much. So happy to be on this call today. I'm calling in from Sweden, of all places, but been a part of IIA and the Research and Advisory Network for many, many years. So I'm happy to kind of come in this context and bringing the experience of focusing on analytics and specifically responsible AI. I'm today head of business strategy and development at Credo AI, also within the field of AI governance. And I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Well, I'm not going to let you get off that easy because you told us a little bit more on your history and I think it's important for us to talk about it. Your time at IKEA really was about how do you do this sorts of thing at scale over at an international organization. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that time?
More than happy to do so. So I come from a background of 20 years being deep into business development, process development, and developing analytics and AI. And over time and during the tenure of about a decade at IKEA, it slowly merged towards being more talking about, okay, how do we do better business with data, but also doing that values aligned and doing that according to a set of principles and framework of ethics that makes sense for a global organization. So being part of developing a framework and blueprint and putting it into practice. And my last role prior to leaving the organization was global head of algorithm and AI ethics. And what it takes to really put something like responsible AI into practice and operationalizing it.
Well, so glad that you are here. I had to do a little math earlier. You said that you cover 20 time zones. There are 38 time zones on this beautiful little blue globe of ours, and you cover all the ones, I think, where there's a landmass. So thank you for taking the time to be here. Yeah. Well, Rehgan, before we go too much farther in, if we're going to talk about responsible AI, we should start by defining it. How would you define responsible AI?
Yeah, I'm going to steal this from Kathy O'Neill, who wrote The Weapons of Math Destruction. She says, "For whom does this fail?" And I always start talking about responsible AI from that perspective. So when we think about how it could fail or, what could happen, we should think about pretty robustly how it might fail today. So when I talk to companies about this, I think about how do people make errors? How are errors existing today in this workflow that you're trying to augment with AI? If it goes wrong, how could it go wrong? And what are the first, second, and third order impacts of that going wrong? Think about it from a cybersecurity perspective. How could it unintentionally go wrong? And then always think about when you're talking about errors, what kinds of errors could happen. And so when I think about responsible AI, there's kind of the more philosophical side of that, and then there's the tactical side. And the philosophical side really roots itself in principles. So what are our principles as a company, and how do we extrapolate that into using AI responsibly? And so those are kind of the two different ways that I define it and think about it to give people kind of a framework of working within it.
I like that, Ben. We spend a lot of time talking about responsible AI here, and one of the ways I think that really helps to ground AI as this technology that's coming in is to think about it as another employee that's coming in. So if we're going to think about an employee coming into an organization, we're going to write an employee handbook that's going to set up all those sorts of rules. Is that maybe a good starting block, a thought process for how we might approach this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a good mental model for organizations to think about. That in many cases, this is AI assist. So it is a new employee coming in. So when we look at it in that light, there's really a couple different three aspects to potentially consider. Like when you onboard a new employee, you typically give them, here's the employee handbook, right? Here's the governance. Here's what we do. Here's what we don't do. That is rooted in our fundamental sort of principles. Okay, so that's sort of the governance, and then then we give that employee guidance of here's how you do your job, right? Here's the work processes. Here's what you do. Here's what you don't do. So we call that this notion of guidance and guardrails, right? So governance, guidance, and guardrails, and then the third piece is really then what's the information and what's the data? What is the skill set that person needs to have to be successful? So we can look at that in terms of AI capabilities. What are the capabilities? So really that's a mental model: governance, guidance, guardrails, and capabilities is another way to perhaps think about it.
Yeah, I like that. Now as technologists, we like to call it, to bundle all that together and call it a framework. I used the analogy before of the employee resource manual. But ultimately, what we're doing is we're creating these governance, guidance, guardrails that are going to help this new technology behave and interact inside of this organization. Now, Giovanni, your current company really helps companies to do this, but maybe we can talk about why. Let's dig in a little bit deeper on why this is important to do, if not before, really quickly while you're working on this project.
Yeah, and I think I want to echo what both Rehgan and Ben have said, and to also state that we need to be quite deliberate and conscious in how we are to use data models and the contextual use of AI. Many times it's about also being aware that it is quite volatile. It is uncertain. There is an ambiguity. It's a complexity in this. And to be able to manage this, it's not only to create the perfect plan or the perfect cookbook, but it's also to see how do one have relevant frameworks and processes that make sense in that specific organization. I think there is a lot of great frameworks around responsible AI and responsible AI use out there, hundreds of them. What I think one of the discussions I've had with organizations over the years is that it's great to have inspiration from frameworks on the outside, but it needs to be rooted in the corporate context of which one is operating in your existing business ethical approach. If you're in your existing corporate social responsibility approach, how you look upon sustainability, but also sustainability of the use of technology and how to use it, but also how one looks upon risk and compliance as a business, and then bringing that along, that line of thinking into technology. So I don't think we need to reinvent so much, but rather see how do one bring what one already have along and then design it to be agile enough to manage when things are moving quite fast.
That's so good. Now, two things on that. First of all, folks, if you, here's a question for you to use, just pop it in the chat. Does your organization have a framework, have a model at which it's helping to ensure that your solutions for AI are responsible solutions in your organization? Now, I loved one of the things you said in there, which I'm actually going to pivot over to Rehgan on, and you said utilizing data in the context of AI. And that is a great phrase because AI, first of all, isn't new. But secondly, it's utilizing information and technology that has been in organizations for a while. It's just surfacing it in a new area. So Rehgan, when we think about this, it really isn't revolution. It should be evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing to remember with AI is one, it is probabilistic. So it's not, it's not if it'll be wrong, it's when it'll be wrong. And the second is that it will mimic the data that it uses to learn. So if you have a process that's inherently biased or inherently wrong, you're only going to set yourself up for being more wrong or more biased. And so the important thing, and I'll point back to Kathy again, because I really like the way that she thinks about this. As technologists, we tend to think about the fun, like model performance metrics and statistics about how models are performing. That's great. Love that. Let's keep doing that. However, the problem is how it's being used. It's in the usage side. So a model could be accurate, and if you used it in a certain way, it would be ethical and unethical at the same time. And so we focus a lot on just thinking about that usage. So Giovanni mentioned context. The context is so critical, and it's after the model. Now, there's a bunch of stuff you can do from a technology perspective, data perspective, to reduce bias and to make the model more performant and align the model to our intentions. That's what we want to do. However, there's a lot of education in the user side. And even if we're doing automation, even more guardrails we need to put in place and be very, very thoughtful about, again, how can this go wrong and for who? I point back to like the recidivism example a lot. It could be accurate, but it's what we do with that information that actually makes it ethical or not ethical. And that's rooted in principles. So if we have information, what do we do with it? What actions do we take? And so that's a lot of the way that we like to look at it, especially from a context perspective. And most organizations are not very conscious or thoughtful about that because it just kind of happens. It's in the culture. People just make the decisions. And so that's kind of the hard part.
Yeah, and I can nothing but agree with you, Rehgan. And would you say that you're recognizing that this is a new way of thinking? Because when I've thought of technology and software development, it has been managed as technology. It has been managed to be able to put in the right technical expertise, you gear up a team, and then you solve the technical problem. While what we're talking about here is a socio-technical problem where you need to both manage the technical aspect, but also the contextual use, which involves society. It involves humans. It involves the nuances and that comes with reality.
Yeah,
1,000%. Yeah. I mean, we're going from these discriminative models to these more generative models, which are very different. This actually ties back to our ROI conversation on why it's so hard to calculate ROI for these things. How do you measure the influence that a generative model has on a person that makes a decision? And not just from an ROI perspective, financial perspective, but also ethical and impact perspective. So I couldn't agree with you more. It's a change in mindset on how we're thinking about these things.
Yeah, we like to think about it, or a way I think about it sometimes is, AI makes machines be better machines so that humans can be better humans, right? And so if I ground myself in that thinking of how can humans be better humans, that drives a lot of the intent and ethical and sort of context, because this is just about human behavior being modified with better information, right?
Yeah. So true. Now Bhaskar's got a question I think we'll jump into. Now he asks it's a two-part question. It says, how do governments need to implement AI guardrails now that there's multimodal? I think we could pull government and enterprise, we could sub stuff out there. But I think a more interesting part of that question is the second part that says, and a single rogue or wrongly modeled AI agent can be disastrous to a business. How can we tackle that at a technical level? Now, I think we're making the point that it's not just a technical level approach. And what do we do when the bad person does a thing, when we miss it? But, I'll just open that up. Maybe we'll start with you, Rehgan, on how we might approach this.
Yeah, I think there's a concept in the cybersecurity realm called excessive agency. So that's the ability to give these models access to act on and do things. So they give a lot of examples of a model that can code, that can push things to a GitHub repository, that can, act, and it has permissions to do that. And so I think it's actually very, very important that companies think robustly. Like Ben mentioned, treat this like an employee. Can you trust that employee immediately? Do you want to give it access? Do you want to give it read-write access to all of your GitHub repos? Probably not. So when we think about action, automation, agency, that's super critical. So that's to kind of address the rogue, wrongly modeled AI agent. We should be very thoughtful about what we're asking it to do, what tasks it's going to accomplish, what parameters trigger certain alerts, and how we can monitor that more robustly. I think when it comes to government's job is to think about protecting, rights, human rights. And so I think when they're thinking about this, and the EU, I actually think did a decent job, thinking really robustly about protecting human rights and really emphasizing that piece, because we can't have the government giving advice on ethical guidelines for companies. We can have them regulating it from a human rights perspective. And that's more fundamental. And so when we think about principles, again, we've got principles as a government, as a country, globally interacting with different countries, and then at the company level. So I find a lot of companies are leaning on the government a little too hard to give them guidance. Like, you should do more work internally to define those principles. And then, of course, the fundamentals that these governments are also passing.
Great response. Giovanni, I'd be really interested in your response on this one, especially since you're on an opposite side of the ocean than we are.
Yeah, and I can nothing but agree with Rehgan has said, and the sentiment of what one can do on a quite abstract level when you're on a regional or national level. Well, if we first kind of have I believe what is quite critical for any kind of organization that want to adopt AI is to have a proper risk management system of AI, and to be able to steer that in a way that you have a good balance and guardrails and measurements to be able to manage the different levels of risks that certain using the different types of AI has, and to be very conscious of what you allow it to do. What your kind of guardrails you put into place in both terms of technical metrics and the controls you need to have, but also see to that, how does it connect to your business processes? How does it connect with your interactions with the world outside? And to be able to be consciously and deliberately taking decisions and taking responsibility for that while you're doing so. Because I think that it is both having a robust risk management approach and system, a robust monitoring system to be able to uphold that, but also taking active choices when it's not good enough to be able to let go, but also seeing that you can many times utilize AI in a way where it will deviate, it will diverge, but you can act upon it fast enough. So I think it's about for organizations to be very conscious and put these practices into place. When we then look upon organization on a more national level and regional level, I believe that what can be done is nudging society as a whole towards better practice of transparency, documentation, and to create a more transparent value chain around AI. To be able to say that it is not good enough that we have black box models. It is not good enough that we don't understand how, what, and why, and how a model have been trained that is utilized further down in the AI application. But the requirement is, the reference of good, is that we should know this value chain as well as we know the food value chain, or the chemical value chain, or the aviation value chain, because we demand that we should have that robustness of understanding it further down in its use.
That's so good. So we're talking a lot about, there's areas of risk that we can talk about risk in our governance plan. We can talk about risk on the technical side. We can talk about risk in what happens on the cultural side in an organization. But brilliant Kathy asked the question, should the risk leader in an organization be the one to ensure that AI is used responsibly? A lot of times it falls to the AI chief, or is that just giving too many keys to the wrong person? Everybody gets a chance here. We'll start with Ben.
Should the risk leader in org be the one? At the end of the day, this is a board governance sort of oversight, and so ultimately it moves to the board. To delegate it to anyone specifically would be wrong, and absolves the organization of the ubiquitous sort of conversations. Because for AI to be successful, you've got to have conversations that are boundary spanning, right? There's a risk conversation, there's a technical conversation, there's a financial conversation. It is across all groups because it fundamentally alters work processes in decision making. So when I think about things in that context, it's a board level sort of conversation in terms of governance in accountability. It can be the tactical sort of execution and the planning and serving up. Absolutely. So someone can do that as long as they're a strong leader that spans boundaries. I think that's the key, because if you have a leader that is very functionally oriented and doesn't span boundaries, there will be inadvertent consequences that will not be considered.
Rehgan, thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, hi, Kathy. I'm going to shout you out too, because you gave an excellent Women in Analytics webinar on this idea of decentralized governance, which really stuck with me. I've been in the governance space in AI for almost a decade now. And one of the biggest problems that I see is that they try to centralize these governance structures and they try to force everyone to go through them. And if we're in this motion of decentralizing and democratizing AI across organizations, one of the biggest mistakes you can do is try to force everyone through this really core centralized, risk management structure. I think the more we can decentralize these, and I do think there's a big difference between accountability and responsibility inside of a company. Our fun little racy charts, right? So I think everyone's responsible. I think everyone owns it. Everyone should be empowered to implement and manage risk at their level. And then there needs to be someone accountable for that. There needs to be someone that sees the bigger strategy, make sure that everybody's implementing best practices, everyone has the tools that they need. And that to me is 100% critical. So when we talk about who's in charge, that's a really hard question, because again, accountability, there needs to be somebody accountable for it. If everyone's accountable for it, nobody's accountable for it. So we have to have some level of accountability and kind of reporting back. And that's why I find these kind of hub and spoke models tend to work very well. And also different parts of the organization have different risk tolerances. Your marketing team might have a different risk profile than your finance team. So, and depending on the industry, that might change and shift. And so it's a little bit of a nuanced answer to your question, but kind of rooted in the philosophy that you mentioned a couple of years ago that I think is brilliant.
That's great. I really like that. I like the nuance picture. That's reality, right?
Yep.
And I would say that one of the key things that when we established the blueprint for responsible AI across Interact Care Group, one of the key things that I wanted to emphasize is that it takes time to implement process, and it's slow. Technology maybe takes also time to establish, but if you start with people, having individuals feeling a responsibility to act the right way, and to be able to see that one needs to act up on seeing how can they deliver into a process. When they see that something is off, how can they raise that challenge? How can they feel that they are committed to it and contribute, even if process and technology is not fully in place, and taking that personal responsibility? And I think that is a very heavy towards how do we create awareness around responsibility? Why is it important? How do we create a movement from an organization that will be infused by technology and AI augmentation over more and more over time? And I like also the idea that accountabilities will not change just because we infuse technology, but we will need the competences from certain specialists that are responsible to contribute the right kind of information to support this process. And that is new, but I would say it's still the same kind of business. Still need to deliver on the same business processes, but we just need to do it slightly different.
Yeah, I love the notion of this is a new technology, but this is still a human system. This is still our business. Nothing changes from how we do what we do. It is an assist. It's a new employee, right? And so this notion of base principles don't change. And base principles around being good humans and being responsible don't change. Now, we can educate you more about how you execute that or things that might factor that. And the organization has that accountability to do that. But base principles don't change.
So one last question as we get close towards the end of our time. There's been a lot of scary talk here about how this could go wrong and wrong quickly. But let's end on a positive note. Let's talk about examples of where you've either seen responsible AI done well, or what that would look like when somebody does it well. So let's paint that picture. Ben, you had the mic. I'm going to give it right back to you.
Yeah, so I think there's a great example of what we're doing internally at Rackspace. We're drinking our own champagne, right? Which is how do we make sure we adopt AI responsibly? So when I think about our work with our ICE is what we call our internal sort of content that serves up information. It would be been very easy to release it to the masses very quickly, but we've done is taken a very thoughtful process around creating the environments, creating security, make sure it's consistent with the policies that we have, and then looking at the financial aspects of it, training up our people. I think everyone in the organization, we have I think 10,000 certifications in AI that we had for our organization last year, because we recognize before you implement a technology, you've got to get the people ready for the change of the technology. And so I think that's a really good example of sort of like first principles. Let's educate the folks that are going to be impacted. Let's be smart with the technical implementation to make sure it doesn't run away from us. And then let's start rolling out to the organization a huge assist, because I could tell you once we showed it to folks, everyone wanted it tomorrow. Right?
They truly did. And everybody saw what happened with ChatGPT. We did smart stuff. I mean, first it was here's a governance plan, and now everybody go get trained.
That's right. That's right. So I think that's a good example.
Yeah, I love it. Rehgan, you're nodding along.
Yeah. I'll shout this out because I've posted it publicly before, but I think it's an excellent example on something that seems small, very doable, very reasonable that every company can do. So one of our customers at Align AI, Bread Financial, did an excellent job. One of the financial leaders there had the saying of no one left behind in this AI movement. And so they implemented one of our AI readiness and safety playbooks that incorporated their core policies as a company and helped from an educational and tactical perspective, less on, hey, this is the policy, make sure you adhere, more on here's what it is, here's how it affects you, here's what to look out for, and kind of in line with things that they actually care about. Again, we can't just like push policies on people. Policies without context is not very useful. And so we want to be able to contextualize them very meaningfully. And so that was a really big initiative that they pushed. They got a lot of people education and training on things like Microsoft Copilot, M365 Copilot, just to get their hands on AI technology, see what it can do for them. And so just kind of that level of coordination around kind of policy management and education is a really good place to start.
Yeah, everybody's pretty excited about getting on the AI bandwagon, but the reality is it is not a sprint. It is a marathon of something to be integrated in. Giovanni, bring us home.
Yes.
Positive examples.
So I would say that as I've been closest to it, I would say that IKEA and since also the movement that have happened since then. So let me talk about the kind of so it doesn't reflect back on me, but rather what I've seen across the multitude of global the global universe of IKEA companies is that it has been less about focus upon technology itself, but rather what is the outcome of using technology. And I think that's been a very positive example of trying to keep it human, trying to keep it down to earth, trying to see that sure, technology can do a lot of fantastic things, but how can you be a part of delivering better business with it that also create positive impact on people, society, and humans. Being very down to earth in terms of creating awareness around it. For an organization that is almost 250,000 people, trying to do that at a breadth and creating an awareness that is not only about technology and the shiny toy, but is actually something that will be with us and should be creating positive impact. But keeping it really down to earth. I think that's been the what I've seen as a good example when disseminating it across the organization, keeping it untechnical.
I love that. Thank you so much for that. All right, now as we close up, you guys have done a great job, of course, of sharing your brilliant information. Your companies have lent you here. Rehgan, you lent yourself here as the CEO, so thank you for that. But let's just take a second. We've got some QR codes I'm going to bring up onto the screen. But while we do that, I do want to at least acknowledge Bhaskar's last question, the asker of many difficult questions. I think that's a 5-hour conversation. We'll add that for a future one. Basically, should this be a universally controlled thing, or do you leave it to your countries? That could be sticky. We will address that one in the future. But thank you, Bhaskar, for being so engaged, and Kathy as well. But all right, now back to this. So, folks, I would love for you. You've introduced yourselves. Introduce your companies and who brought you here, if you will. And then we've got QR codes where people can go and learn more. But Rehgan, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I'll talk about women in analytics. We've got a couple of upcoming conferences. We have one in Portland, Data Connect West. It's on May 8th. So in about a month. And then we have our global event in Ohio called Data Connect that is in July. So I think it's July 11th and 12th. So definitely check us out.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Giovanni, you have 2 jobs to do. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about International Institute for Analytics, but also Credo AI as well. Let's give them a little bit of love.
Exactly. So I'll start off with the International Institute for Analytics. It's an organization to really support analytics leaders across the world, and we're both into supporting them with advisory, but also seeing how they can assess their own maturity and see how they can kind of progress their maturity along the line of the technology development, but also bringing their organization along. And on my day job, I'm head of business strategy at Credo AI, which is an AI governance platform supporting organizations to establish AI governance at scale.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Also wearing 2 hats is Ben Blanquera. So Ben, let's start with CDO Magazine.
Yeah. So I'm on the editorial board of CDO Magazine. It's a world's largest group for chief data officers. It is in, I think, just about every country in the world now. And we have summits all over the world now that are happening. I think we've got a summit in Cincinnati in September that's upcoming, and I think there's even a global virtual one in upcoming weeks. So go to cdomagazine.tech. It is the world's leading resource for chief data officers. And Jeff, I'll let you talk about Foundry for AI as the other hat.
All right, I'll be happy to do it. So we're here, of course, the host company is Rackspace, but we built a spin-up, a company inside a company called FAIR, the Foundry for AI at Rackspace, where we are dedicated to helping companies deploy and transform their organizations through responsible AI. We've got a whole process to help companies go through that. There, of course, is the QR code if you want to learn more, or just head over to fair.rackspace.com. Now, this was our 6th episode of this. Can you believe that, guys? But we're going to be back again in May, and we will be here. I don't know what that date would be, but it seems like it's the first Wednesday of the month. But watch for notifications on LinkedIn and all the socials, and we'll be back with another great conversation. And hopefully Kathy and Bhaskar will be here as well to help prod us along and keep us off track for our notes, because your questions are better. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today, and panelists. Amazing conversation. Thank you for taking the time out of your day.